Hi, everybody. This is Andrea Pocket, president and co-founder of the Stigma-Free Society. Thank you so much for joining us for our Stigma-Free Live, where today we are talking to Lembi, and I am super excited. In one moment, I will share a little bit about her. But how are you doing today, Lembi? Things going well?
Very well, thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so Stigma-Free Society. Stigma-Free Society is a Canadian registered charity that is dedicated to creating awareness around stigma with a focus on mental health. As well, our values are to be inspiring, to be the solution, to be respectful, and so many other good things. So, I'm a little bit under the weather today, coming to you from Medicine Hat, Alberta, my new home in my new office. So I'm so excited to be here. And Lembi, let's get into your bio. Does that sound good? All right. So Lembi Buchanan is a leading advocate for Canadians living with mental illness, taking on the Canada Revenue Agency single-handedly and winning. Can't wait to talk about that. Her dedication and perseverance lobbying the federal government for more than 20 years has helped to ensure fair tax treatment for her husband, Jim, and others living with bipolar disorder. In 2001, Lembi established the Fighting for Fairness campaign and spearheaded the Coalition for Disability Tax Credit Reform that successfully lobbied the government and led to major amendments in the Income Tax Act. She was subsequently appointed to several federal advisory committees that have led to major improvements in the administration of tax credits for all Canadians with disabilities. Looks like we lost Lembi, but I'm sure she'll be right back. As co-chair of the Disability Tax Fairness Alliance, Lembi continues her advocacy work to ensure that government programs and policies do not discriminate against people living with a severe mental illness. So what is really interesting about Lembi is that she recently published an Aaron Brockovich-style memoir, which is called An Accidental Advocate of Taking on the Tax Bureaucracy. Lembi also shares intimate details of a love story, spanning more than 50 years with a bipolar partner, providing hope for others facing similar challenges. Okay, as we wait for Lembi, I think it'd be great to share a little bit about the Stigma-Free Society and some updates. So we're just going to wait for Lembi, and as soon as she comes back, I want to take this opportunity to share that Stigma-Free has been successful in being entered into a huge contest to win $100,000 with AI Financial. So we would love for you to vote. We'll be conducting a marketing campaign on all our social media channels in the upcoming weeks. And we really hope people will be able to support us with that. Big win, as three charities have been chosen from the Western provinces. And in British Columbia, Stigma-Free Society is representing. So we're very excited about that. All right, and perfect timing for questions. I just finished your bio, so no worries. Oh, and we need to take you off mute at the bottom.
My computer is shutting down on me, so I'm not sure why.
No, that is so odd. Well, we'll give it our best go today. And if it shuts down again, do you want me to invite you back to another interview, or how would you like to handle that?
If it keeps shutting down, we'll have to do it. I'll have to do it on my smartphone.
Okay, perfect. I have no problem filling in the blanks in between. Okay. All right. Okay, Lembi. All right, so let's get into it. Can you share a little bit about your journey and what inspired you to write your memoir?
So when I turned 75, I decided to write an essay for my family and friends. It was just called How Does One Measure 75 Years, with a few hiccups along the way, and people wanted to read more. So I knew I had a story to tell, certainly the journey with living with a bipolar partner for 50 years, and the advocacy work that I've had to take on to make sure that he always had the income supports that he was entitled to when he had a major relapse and was no longer able to work.
Okay.
And
And
so as far
yeah.
as the advocacy work was concerned, I discovered that the government was really breaking the law in so many ways, and then someone had to stop them.
Yeah, I really admire you for that. That's huge. And I think what you've done is very admirable. And we're just excited to have you here today and discuss all of those big wins and especially your memoir. So I know that I've been writing a memoir. It's taking 15 years. It's been taking a long time. And I was telling you earlier how much I admire that you finished yours and got it out there. That's a big feat. And so, writing about emotions and experiences related to mental health can be very challenging. So, how did you approach the process and what kept you motivated?
Well, I had a husband who was always pushing me to get the job done, regardless whether I was advocating on his behalf or. But it was I had always kept journals. So and I kept really nice journals. Like I have this nice leather one here, uh,
Yeah.
going back to the year 2000.
Wow.
And I had letters. We lived in Nova Scotia, and Jim's father lived in Toronto, and he kept all the letters that I sent to him. And Jim wrote about his experiences when he was in the hospital, going back almost 50 years ago. So I had all this material to work with, and certainly it's been difficult to go back to relive some of the old wounds. It's I was very angry many times. I was angry at the government because they were making it so hard for people with mental illnesses to get the disability tax credit. I was angry at myself for putting up with a lot of nonsense from Jim, even though he wasn't well, and I knew he wasn't well, but it was tough. I had two young children to raise. There was a time, I guess it was 1999, I was very depressed. The marriage was falling apart. I didn't see any end to it. I finally had the guts to tell Jim that I too was suffering from depression.
Mm.
And he was lying in bed. He was reading the newspaper. And his response, he didn't even look up. And he says, well, there's always the window. So I went over to the window. We were on the 7th floor of an apartment building in Toronto. And I looked at who was down below and wondered if they would notice if I opened the window. I mean, that was his response. But I did go and get help, and that was really important. So because I had been a writer before and an editor of a city magazine, Halifax Magazine, when we lived in Nova Scotia, I was able to take a step back, and it was as if I was writing about someone else. And I guess that's how I was able to write about it. And Jim encouraged me. He wanted me to be absolutely honest about everything that happened, and some of it was difficult, for sure.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing your story. That is very authentic, vulnerable, and honest. And I really appreciate that for sure. Been through a lot of challenges, and it's amazing to see all the things you're doing today and have built from that very challenging time, which isn't easy to do. So, question 3, your book addresses the issue of violence during psychotic states. What insights or messages would you like readers to take away from your memoir regarding this topic?
So here we get into the stigma of mental illness. And not all people with mental illnesses are violent, but certainly those who are psychotic in a psychotic episode. And it was hard to decide whether or not to write about the time that Jim beat me up. But I had to do that because that's part of the story and part of the story that people need to hear. And we've only known each other for a month. And I was trying to get out of bed to make coffee one morning. Jim was already up. And the next thing I knew, he was on top of me and he was beating me with his hands. And people in a psychotic state have tremendous strength. And, you know, the day before he's telling me I'm the best thing that happened in his world. And now he's beating me. And I told him to stop. He says, well, you can't get out of bed. And I promised not to get out of bed. And then he left within about half an hour. And within a couple of hours, we were living in New York. He was on the roof of St. Patrick's Cathedral waiting for helicopter to take him to God. Fortunately, the police took him to the hospital instead. But I didn't find out until later that for a week he'd been listening to messages on the TV. These were the days when the TV, you had snow on the television after 12 o'clock when the programming stopped. And he was listening to these messages. There were no red flags. At one point, Jim did say that the mafia were following him, but we were living in New York and the mafia was everywhere. So I think it's really, really important for people to take these delusions and when someone's hallucinating, to take them very seriously and to get help. But at that time, I didn't even know Jim had a history of mental illness. So it certainly came as a shock.
Yeah, definitely. And was that in the 70s that this was
That was
happening?
73.
Oh, okay. And there's a lot of stigma, right? Like so much more stigma, then less talk about mental health, a lot more assumptions being made. I know that for sure when I look at my mom's situation as well.
Well, I didn't know that he had a mental illness, and I never occurred to me to call the cops. I just called the locksmith.
Right.
And the cops had to come anyway because I was changing the lock.
Yeah.
And the phone rang, and someone was calling from the hospital asking for me, and told me that he had been hospitalized. Well, what could I do? I didn't want to see him again, but being a caring individual, social worker at that time, I ended up going to the hospital. Fortunately, I was able to get him transferred to a private hospital. His parents were able to cover the costs, and they were doing clinical trials on lithium. So how lucky could we get? He was at the right place at the right time, and as long as he needed to hospital care, which was a month.
Yeah, definitely. Lithium. I don't promote medication either way. I always say that, but I'm very honest that I'm on lithium, and that has been a little bit of a big lifesaver for me, definitely, because I have bipolar disorder as well, as I've shared with you, and I also really understand your husband's experience with psychosis in many ways, as I experienced seeing, an earth form in front of my face as real as I could touch it, and hearing messages through the radio waves, I thought, and being a savior of souls for God. They're so real. Psychosis is as real as reality for people with mental illness. And it definitely is a very difficult condition. And wow, you've been through so much.
It's interesting that the themes are the same.
Yeah.
So similar. It's always taking on the role of a higher power, and it's always to do good works.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? I always wonder about that myself. Okay. All right, so let's move on to your memoir a little bit more. The cover features a bulging briefcase and boxing gloves. Can you explain the significance of these symbols in your story?
So when Jim was denied the disability tax credit, I knew I had to appeal to the tax court of Canada. And I had organized a coalition to advocate for a better form for people with mental impairments because they were being discriminated against. Government doesn't seem to think that mental illness is as disabling as many physical impairments. Yeah. So I needed to act and look like a lawyer. I did my homework. I researched all the cases that were available dealing with the DTC and tax court. And I had to know my stuff, as simple as that. And when I went to court, and we won the court case, Jim's CRA was not happy. They asked for a judicial review. It went to the Federal Court of Appeal, and there was a unanimous decision by all three judges that yes, indeed, it was an obvious case. Yes. And the boxing gloves. So our advocacy efforts were very successful, and the federal government created a technical advisory committee for the persons with disabilities. I was appointed to the committee. We had doctors, lawyers, CEOs of various health charities, and then there was me. And at our first meeting, there was a lot. We had $80 million was put on the table. It was right there in the middle of the table. so to speak. This was very unusual because usually you make recommendations and then you have to fight for the funds. But this time they put the money up front, which is about 135 million in today's dollars. We're talking about 2003.
Wow.
And they wanted to deal with poverty issues and reduce poverty with people with disabilities. I mean, certainly a very worthwhile issue, but that was not the mandate of our committee. And everybody else on the committee had been at these government committees before in Ottawa. So when I went home, I hunted down a pair of boxing gloves at a used sporting goods store, and I showed up. And the next time we had a meeting in Ottawa, I showed up with a sports bag, opened the zipper and pulled out the boxing gloves and put them on. A perfect fit, reminiscent of O.J. Simpson, which was not a perfect fit. Anyway, we got right down to business. We moved away from the other issues, and we did some good work and made a lot of recommendations and led to amendments of the Income Tax Act.
Amazing. Oh, wow. Quite a story for sure. So what impact do you hope your memoir will have on readers, especially those who are dealing with similar experiences? What is your hope there?
Well, certainly to let people know that they're not alone, that the struggles, and also the power of unconditional love. Jim's father was always there. And as you probably are aware, one of the symptoms of bipolar disorder is overspending, not really sort of thinking about long-term issues with budgets and stuff like that. And whenever Jim was hospitalized, I would find out that he was really heavily in debt. Right from the beginning, I always kept my finances separate from him because I learned early on that there were these issues. And Jim's father would just call me and say, "How much do you need?" And he would send a check. And so I do have a little bit of a memoriam to him in my book. The other thing is medications work. I've got a cancer condition. I take medication to prevent a relapse. Jim takes medication to treat his symptoms and prevent a relapse. I mean, there is bipolar disorder can be a very deadly and dangerous disease. And certainly that's, I mean, all the difficulties that we've had with the relationship, and there's plenty of them.
Wow. It seems like you've come so far with so much understanding and love. You're just frozen right now, so I'm just going to give it a moment to see if your computer comes back in. Okay. And so Lembi, I'm just going to take you off the stream and then re-add you to see if that helps. And then... All right, so it looks like it's just me again, Andrea Pocket here from Stigma-Free Society. So what I'm going to do is just simply wrap up and hope that Lembi can join back in. And there was a couple other little questions I was going to ask her. Basically, I just don't know if people often realize how significant writing a memoir is. A memoir, you're taking your life experiences and you are putting them on the page for everyone to read and everyone to even heal from. So it can be a very difficult and challenging thing to do. But I really like speaking with Lembi because I've been writing my own memoir for 15 years, and it's something that has been a big challenge to finish. So in talking with her, I'm really inspired by people who are able to finish their memoirs for sure, especially on such very difficult and heart-wrenching and challenging circumstances that they've gone through, but then also to come out on the other side with love, unconditional love, and also to ensure that people know that they aren't alone. And that is one of the biggest features of Lembi's book that I really like that she mentioned. So when she does come back, I want to talk about memorable and touching reactions to her book and future projects. So here she is.
My system crashed again.
We're almost done anyway, so we'll just have 2 more
Never have.
questions and we're good. Don't worry. I'm good at talking in between.
Okay. That's right.
Okay. So Lembi, number 6 question. So I was wondering, can you share any memorable or touching reactions that you've had from your book?
So one individual, his family's from India, and he was so grateful I wrote the book because
All right, so I think we're frozen again. And so I'm going to remove Lembi from the stage. And I think I'm going to have to conclude the interview there. But I think what I'll do is I can ask Lembi to create a video and she can answer the last 2 questions around memorable and touching reactions to her book. And also, what future projects should we be looking out for from her? What kind of advocacy and storytelling and all of those great things as well. So, just to wrap up, I would like to say that Stigma-Free Society is going through a future name change to be Stigma-Free Mental Health. We are focusing a lot on mental health, so we are very excited about that. I also wanted to mention that we have a new programs manager, Krista, who will be conducting some of these Stigma-Free live events in the future, which I'm super excited about. And we just have a lot of new people coming on board with our 6 Adler interns from university. That's really exciting as well, and a whole lot of new developments. So thank you, everybody from Stigma-Free Society, for all of your support. We'll be posting a lot of social media posts and sending out emails and newsletters for people to support us in our IA financial group contest for $100,000. So lots of exciting things. So thank you so much. Please promote awareness, understanding, and the acceptance of each other. Thank you and have a lovely day.